Here are the metrics for my channel's slow growth. I posted my first video on February 22nd of 2022, which oddly enough was 22222. Anyway, by year's end, I had picked up 283 subscribers. By the end of the following 2023 year, I had moved up to 499 subscribers. I had gained less new followers and simultaneously lost some. There was a disheartening stagnation in the first 3 quarters, with the vast majority of new followers showing up in the last stretch, but I kept marching on and eventually regained some traction. 2024 was my biggest year so far, having moved up to 951 total subscribers as a clock rolled over midnight in my time zone. Yes, editing this video is how I spent my New Year's Eve because I'm old. This last year I had picked up 452 subscribers, nearly doubling my following by roughly increasing the total by 90%. I was hoping to crack 1,000, but it became apparent that was not going to happen as the year neared its end, but it's still forward progress, and positive growth is always something to be grateful for. To improve numbers further, it may be beneficial for me to dip back into the realm of social media, which I had left over a decade ago due to too many ex-girlfriends. I'll look at various platforms, and a lot of these I've never actually seen and only heard of. TikTok, Twitter, or X, or whatever the hell it's called these days, and maybe Reddit, Pinterest, and of course, the dreaded Facebook. These are the counts of miniatures and large items I've painted, such as busts, gigantic monsters, or terrain. Thus far, everything in yellow is what I painted in my life prior to this channel. Anything before the year 2000 I did not really count, as it was only a base coat followed by a dry brushing. I didn't know edge highlighting was even a thing back then, and I was also using cheap craft store paints. 2021 was when I decided I wanted to get back into painting miniatures. I don't really remember how this was initiated, but at some point I considered making a YouTube channel, but I knew I wasn't good at all. This isn't just to tear myself down, but just an honest consideration. With that in mind, I decided to make my videos focus mostly on this is what I did, and this is what I liked and hated, and what I would do different, as opposed to them being tutorials on how to actually do something. I started with painting my Dust Tactics armies to get some quick experience in, and what I can tell you for sure is that the 4 biggest contributing factors for me getting back into this hobby were Marco Frazzoni from Not Just Mecha, Zumikito from Zumikito's Miniatures, Jeremy Pillipow from Black Magic Crafts, and Kenny Boucher from Next Level Gaming. Kenny's tutorial on how to paint the US Airborne from Bolt Action is specifically what I emulated as I made this plunge. These collective gentlemen made what I knew was going to be a daunting journey seem genuinely fun. Links to their pages are in this video's description. If you aren't subscribed to them already, be sure to have a gander. Once 2022 rolled around, I took what I learned from the 117 miniatures I rushed through in the preceding 3 months and began to take my time and try different approaches. A massive challenge I had was learning to thin the paints properly. I also didn't have a wet palette during most of the year, so maintaining a consistent ratio of paint to water was nigh impossible. But towards the end of the year, my work started to improve. 2023 wasn't much different. I started trying non-metallic metal more, and again, towards the end part of the year, I started to see improvements, specifically with my highlighting. 2024, I somewhat hit the reset button. I swapped from using the old Army Painter War Paint line to Liquitex Acrylic Gouache as my primary paint, and everything I had learned about thinning and mixing had to be rethought due to the differences in these paints. And much like the 2 previous years, the last quarter is where I seem to make my next big leap as I finish strong with some of the latest miniatures being amongst the best that I've painted. Looking forward to 2025, I have decided to set 5 primary goals to focus on during the year. I have many more, but to ensure I do not get overwhelmed, I'll only focus on these. The first is to decrease my average editing times for each video. I've been keeping track of these, and as you can see, on some of these projects, it's taking me nearly as much time to make a video on the miniature I painted as it took me to actually paint the miniature. To bring this down some, things I can do are to update the templates I'm using and to create more templates. Another thing I can try is to reposition where I mount the camera. Currently it's set right up above the miniature. Because the current position is not from my perspective, a lot of times parts of the miniature, such as long appendages or wings or large held items like a shield, can obscure what I'm doing, making portions of the film worthless for viewers. Getting the camera more in line with my perspective could reduce that issue and consequently reduce the amount of footage I have to sift through for clear shots. I also need to consider moving the camera back just a little or zooming out. Doing so will help with another issue I have, where I'm way off center. It infuriates me when what I'm painting is all of a sudden at the very bottom of the screen or out of focus, which also limits the footage I can use and increases my editing time. The second goal for 2025 is to ramp up my experience with non-metallic metals. In my last video, I said I only painted 9, but after going through all of the miniatures that I've painted, I discovered that the number is actually 19. I didn't realize it was that high due to the fact that some of them were so minute or outright bad, and I couldn't immediately tell that it was an attempt at non-metallic metal. I aim to do non-metallic metals for everything I paint this next year, with the exception of batch painting or wargaming specific projects, in order for it to match the rest of the army. My third goal is a simple one, and to continue improving my brush control, which will come from continued painting. However, I do have some ideas for a couple of future videos to specifically work on this. My fourth goal is to improve my highlight shapes and their placements. This is going to boil down to me taking the time to research how light reflects from different shapes and materials, and have examples of this with lighting from different angles, and then building a catalog of these to refer back to as needed. My final goal is to improve my miniature photography. I've already started this process, but some things that will help is to improve lighting and to figure out how to use a camera, shutter speed, focal length, exposure, etc. These are things I need to actually dig into. I also have 3 lenses for my camera, and I've only tried using one thus far. A macro lens, I'm having to sit around 7 to 8 feet back to get the entire, or at least most of the miniature, into focus. The camera is also on its default settings, so I'm sure there's a lot of adjustment that's needed. These are, in my opinion, the worst 5 miniatures that I painted this year. The leprechaun, now looking back, looks as if I unconsciously phoned it in. The highlights should have come up much brighter. This miniature is very dark and it just looks unfinished. The male visionary. This was an exercise of me trying to paint something in a very dark environment, which in fairness to myself is not how I normally paint. In the end, there's still a lot of better highlighting shapes and placements I could have used, and I should have introduced more colors to help upset the overwhelming blue, such as more purples and maybe some dark reddish browns. The Succubus Queen Eluvishef was a foray into trying to paint only with oils. This was a painful venture and one I doomed myself with from the very start due to the way I prepped it in the early stages, which was, as it turns out, the bane of oils, as it caused the oil to not dry properly or stick. Even after 6 months, if I touch it gently with my finger, the oil still comes off. My intention was to finish it, and this was supposed to be the halfway point. Well, likely it'll be as far as it ever gets. I'm thinking about improving my oil use as a distant future goal, and I may repurchase this miniature and have a second crack at it, and then have a side-by-side comparison later. The American Beauty. I don't specifically hate how it came out, and my problem is that it's not what I intended. I intended a younger look, but due to the colors used in the skin and the way I highlighted her face, she looks as if she's much older than what I was aiming for. The makeup is also a lot, giving her a whorish appearance, though I'll say, for an older gal, she is keeping fit. Them Jane Fonda workouts are doing it for her. My fifth choice for the worst is more of a combination of things on a squad of miniatures I painted. 3 of them came out greenish when I was trying for some experimental skin tones, which might be fine for orcish or goblin skin, but not your non-high fantasy human. The highlights on the flesh for the miniature on the left are also really bad, specifically the shapes. These are what I feel are the best 5 miniatures I painted this year. For the Barbarian, I really like how the flesh and face came out. with a little bit of blue around the chin for stubble. For the Fallout dog, I really like how the colors in the fur came out, though there could definitely be improvements on the highlight shapes and positions. The Spirit of Spring and the Spirit of Autumn are the next two, and I just really like how the flesh on both of these came out, as well as how the lips didn't look too gaudy and had a more natural appearance. The 2007 Christmas Carol Sophie, specifically the Sophie miniature herself, is probably the best miniature I've ever painted. It's not my favorite, but skill-wise I think it's up there. It is my best highlight placement on hair, flesh, and clothing thus far, and this is despite the myriad of issues I could quickly point out all over the miniature. This is a side-by-side comparison of the very first miniature I painted on this channel and the very last, at least up till this point, just to show how far I've come in the last 3 years. All in all, 2024 was a good year for my painting journey and for this channel's health. As there always be, there is only far more for me to learn and improve at, and I can't wait to see how much further I can push myself by the end of the next year. And now, here's a quick look at all the miniatures I painted this year, though not necessarily in the order that they were painted. And that'll bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or inspired to set your own goals for the new year, or even to pick up the brush for the first time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you can easily support the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.